As we continue our study in the Gospel of Mark, today we come to Mark chapter 12, and we're going to examine verses 38 through 44. Now, the context of our pericope is that Jesus and the 12, along with a large number of pilgrims, are on their way to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast of Passover. On the way, Jesus had told his disciples that once they got to Jerusalem, he would be betrayed, turned over to the authorities, tortured, and crucified. But on the third day, he told them he would rise again. Now, Jesus also, upon his triumphal entry into the city of Jerusalem, had cleansed the temple area of the money changers. And the money changers were those who took foreign coins and coins with pagan symbols on them and turned them into suitable coins to donate in the temple treasury. But the money changers had been a part of the corrupt temple system and were cheating and robbing and frauding the people. And so Jesus, in his anger, threw them out of the court of the Gentiles, out of the temple area. So that is the background of where we come to our story for today. And Jesus had just been challenged by various religious leaders in Jerusalem, but particularly his chief opponents were those known as the scribes, the so-called doctors or teachers of the law, the famous preachers and teachers, the educated folk in the ways of the law of Moses at that time. So we pick up the story in Mark chapter 12, verse 38. In verse 38 we read, as he taught, this was in the temple courts, probably now we're moving into the court of women. As you entered the temple, it was divided into a number of courts. The first would be the court of the Gentiles, where virtually anyone could come, and this is where the table of the money changers was set up. And then from that, you moved into another court separated unto itself, which was the court of women, and all Jewish women could go into there. And then you had the court for the Jewish men, and then so forth into the sanctuary of the temple. So as he taught in the temple courts, Jesus said, watch out! Beware, look out for the teachers of the law, the scribes, the famous preachers and theologians of their day. Now, many of these scribes belonged to the religious political party of the Pharisees, but not all. Some were Sadducees, and some belonged to no party at all. But a large number were Pharisees at the time of Jesus. Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes. What does he mean by that? Well, ostentatious religious garb, religious uniforms. And these religious uniforms were long white linen robes that went all the way to the ground. Now, most common folk did not wear robes that long. They were just below the knees or just above, but the scribes like to wear long, flowing white linen robes with long, what were called phylacteries or fringes on them to let the people know how religious and how special they were by their garments. So they wore them everywhere to attract attention, let you know, I'm special. I'm a holy man. Look at my robe. Look how I'm different from you. Maybe some preachers should take notice of that today, that Jesus and his disciples wore the same clothes as the common folk when they did their preaching, teaching, and ministry. Just a thought. So they like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, in the town centers. And in fact, the rules were that if a scribe with long flowing robes walked into the marketplace, all the people would have to stand up and give them honor. They like to be greeted with respect. They like to be called by certain titles: Rabbi, Father, Master. And they enjoyed those special religious titles reserved for them. And they have the most important seats in the synagogue. Evidently, these were the benches in front of the ark or the chest where the Torah, the scriptures, were stored. And so they sat in front of the rest of the people, facing the people, so that all the people in the synagogue would look at them, place of prestige and honor. So they loved the most important seats in the synagogue and the places of honor at banquets. If you were going to throw a banquet, you certainly wanted to have a prestigious scribe or two or three or four come and lend some credence to your banquet. But when they came, the scribes had special seats. They had the first reclining couches. And remember, in those days, people reclined at table. So the places of honor were always given to the scribes. But, verse 40, Jesus says, they devour widows' houses. And interestingly, the verb devour there is gobble up. It's the same verb used in Mark chapter 4, verse 4, where Jesus talks about the birds devouring, gobbling up the seed that has been sown, and then he likens those birds to the devil. So they gobble up widows' houses. Now, how could they do that? What's going on there? Well, in that patriarchal society, if a husband died, his wife had only whatever was left to her as an inheritance. Generally speaking, females did not have occupations, professions, no income, and if their husband died and left them nothing, they were destitute. But most husbands left them at least a home and hopefully some money to live on. But the scribes were taking away their houses. Now, that means that they left these widows absolutely penniless and destitute. And remember, the scribes were the lawyers of the day. They wrote out legal documents, and perhaps they manipulated them and schemed in order to take away everything these widows had as an inheritance, and it funded the scribes. The scribes, by law, were not allowed to take an income from their work as preachers, but they managed. They got money by nefarious means, and according to some commentators, they actually received money from the temple treasury as a payoff by the chief priests for their help and their services. So they devour widows' houses, and for a show, for a cover-up, they make lengthy prayers. Now, what this is really talking about is their lengthy prayers took place in the temple. Because the scribes owed a lot of their success in Jerusalem to the funding of the temple. And as I said, perhaps they even benefited from those funds. And so it was in their benefit to see the temple system, which, as I said, in Jesus' day had become corrupt, to continue to function and to prosper. So they built up the temple and all of its ceremonies and observances, and particularly they were concerned about the income and the money coming into the temple to keep themselves well taken care of. So there was a cover-up here. While they cheated the poor, took away widows' homes, yet they were seemed to be the pious people supporting the temple system, which had become quite corrupt in the days of Jesus. Here's what Jesus says about them. These men will be punished most severely. They will receive the greater condemnation. Why? Because they're hypocrites. They profess to be people of God, preaching and teaching the word of God, and yet they're robbing the people. They're taking advantage of the poor, and they're hypocrites. And Jesus says those people will receive the greater condemnation. Now we come to a section that talks about the widow's offering. It's sometimes referred to via the King James Version as the widow's mite. But what we need to keep in mind here is this is a continuation, really, of Jesus' attack against the scribes and against the corrupt temple system. Verse 41. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put. Now, this is in the court of women, and there was a place where offerings were put. Uh, they were putting their money, notice that putting, I want you to think about that verb for just a moment. We'll come back to it. Putting their money in the temple treasury. The Greek term there is gonsophalakion, and there's some debate about exactly what it is. Some think it was perhaps a room, but I think probably it just generally referred to the 13 trumpet-shaped receptacles that were against the wall in the court of women that were there to receive offerings. Now, each of the 13 trumpet-shaped things was there labeled for its specific cause or purpose, because there were offerings for a lot of things: trespass offerings, sin offerings, uh, offerings for uncleanness. There was an offering for birds, which probably Mary and Joseph put money in when they redeemed their son Jesus by offering 2 turtle doves. So they put the money in, and the money was supposedly used to buy the birds to make the sacrifice with. But it's very questionable what some of the chief priests did with that money and how they used it. So you have 13 trumpet-shaped vessels where people placed their coins, their money, into the temple treasury for various offerings. So Jesus sat down opposite that place in the court of the women where the offerings were made and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Listen to this. Many rich people threw in large amounts. Did you catch that? They didn't put, they didn't place, they threw. Now, why would they throw their coins into those trumpet-shaped vessels? To attract attention. It made a lot of noise. All of those coins just being thrown in, and talk about sounding your trumpet before to attract people's attention to your piousness. They would throw their money in, make a noise, attract attention, and the crowd would look. Ooh, look how many coins they threw into the trumpet-shaped vessels for offerings. So many rich people threw in large amounts. But a poor widow came and put. She dropped. She didn't throw, no need to throw. She just dropped 2 very small copper coins. And the Greek term there is lepton. And it was a very small coin, worth perhaps in today's economy, somewhere around 80 cents. So a total offering of $1.60. She put into the trumpet-shaped vessel of the treasury. Now, Mark, for his perhaps Italian Roman readership, translates that into a Latin version of a few cents, a quadron, a Latin coin equivalent. Verse 43, calling his disciples, or literally summoning. In other words, you come here. This is a teaching point. Summoning his disciples, Jesus said, and he makes it very pronounced because he uses the formula, amen, amen. Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. She was giving up her life. Now, we obviously give this poor woman credit for what she did, the self-sacrificing, and it prefigures Jesus giving up his life for God and for people, as this woman gave up her life and those 2 little coins for what she thought was the work of God. So we respect her for that and honor her for that and learn a lesson from it. However, that is really not the chief point of stewardship about this entire story. Let's look at it carefully. Why was this widow poor? Widows in Jewish culture were supposed to be taken care of. In fact, there was an entire tithe every 3rd year to take care of the widows. They were to be helped. Widows who had no inheritance and were destitute were, according to the law, to be provided for. So why was this woman poor? Why was this woman destitute? It ought not have happened. Something is wrong with the system. The law was not being obeyed, not being followed, and these poor widows were being taken advantage of by the same religious system that was supposed to be helping them. Something is terribly wrong here in this situation. This corrupt temple system has got to go. And what Jesus is in reality doing here is condemning the religious system and the teachers, preachers who were bilking people, the poor people, out of their sustenance, out of their livelihood. And Jesus condemns this. So what do we learn from this account? Well, the poor widow appears to love God with her whole heart, and she was willing to sacrifice all her money, her life, everything she had, for God, or for where she thought God was working. And as I said, she prefigures Jesus and the life of the disciples of Jesus of being willing to sacrifice all and give their lives for God. However, it seems that the main point of this story is that the widow was a victim of an evil and corrupt religious system that took all she had and misused it and left her destitute while the scribes got rich. She should have received help, but she didn't. And eventually the temple system, which she had given all of her resources to support, was going to be destroyed and cease to exist. The main point of Jesus' words appears to be, watch out for the preachers of the law. Watch out for rich preachers. Those who claim to represent God, but take advantage of sincere worshipers to make themselves rich and famous while their worshipers struggle. Watch out for preachers who appear pious and make exaggerated religious claims, long prayers, and promises. The promises that you will prosper, that you will get rich. But who prospers and gets rich? The preacher. They make promises but get rich off the donations of the poor and needy followers who sacrifice their livelihoods to line the pockets of the preachers. Does that happen today? Oh, my friends. Some well-known preachers who appear regularly on television proclaim a gospel that is about prosperity. And who prospers? Well, the preachers do. A gospel of prosperity, a gospel where they preach more about health and wealth than about Jesus and his sacrificial life. According to news sources, some of these preachers are worth anywhere from $50 to $760 million. Some have private jet aircraft, their own landing strips, and lavish mansions. And all of this is supported by donations of hardworking people, many of whom are struggling to get by because they think they're honoring God. It appears to me that this is what Jesus was talking about and what we as Christians need to watch out for. Now, you might say, well, sports stars and singers and others, they make millions. Well, sports stars, movie stars, famous singers and others make millions of dollars a year, but they're not asking poor people for donations in the name of God. There is a difference. It's not wrong to be rich per se, but it is wrong to love and lust for riches. It is right to use money and to love people. It is wrong to love money and use people. Preachers, Ministries, churches, denominations need to be financially accountable. People need to know who their board of directors are. If an organization will not tell you who their board of directors are and keep it secret, I would have some severe reservations and questions about that organization. People need to know who the board of directors of churches, denominations are. I would ask, is this church, is this denomination, is this organization audited by reputable independent auditing firms? And do they make the audit available on request for any of their members who desire to look at it? Churches, denominations, people who claim to be doing the work of God need to let their donors know where their donations go, how their money is used. They need to be transparent, clear, open, and accountable for that. Now, our church and denomination do that. Most churches, really, and most denominations do, but not all. And any that do not should be highly suspect. You know, God's people love God. And God's people are willing to sacrifice, as the poor widow was. They're willing to sacrifice to honor God and to participate in the work that God is doing on this earth. And so we should. However, we must not be naive that all who say they know God and are doing his work actually are. Don't be naive to believe that necessarily. You know, Jesus said that many will come to him saying, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not drive out demons in your name? And in your name perform many miracles? And the Lord will say to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you evildoers. It should make us think. Let us all be wise as Christians and make sure our resources are going where God wants them to go, to preaching the gospel, to serving humanity, to helping the needy, not taking from them, helping the poor. Let us all be willing to sacrifice for God and for others, love God and love our neighbors, but be sure we are doing so wisely. Then we can truly do it with all our heart, with all our mind, and all our being. So, friends, watch out for rich preachers. Watch out for the preachers of the law. Know where Jesus is truly working, and then join with him with all your heart, all your mind, and all your being, with everything you have. And know that you are truly participating in the real ministry of Jesus Christ, which continues until he comes again. Let's heed these words. Let's watch out for rich preachers.